Welcome to Missional Catholics, a new podcast of the Archdiocese of Omaha. I'm Archbishop George Lucas. In the Gospel, we read that Jesus sent out 72 followers from all walks of life ahead of him on a mission to share that the kingdom of God is at hand. Go on your way, Jesus told them. Today's conversation explores how each of us can proclaim the kingdom and witness to the dignity of all human life at a time when the culture of death is becoming entrenched in our laws and in our society. Today's guest is Dr. Charles Camosy. Dr. Camosy is a moral theologian and award-winning author. A graduate of the University of Notre Dame, he holds doctoral degrees in philosophy and Christian ethics. He currently serves as professor of medical humanities at the Creighton University School of Medicine, and he holds the Msgr Curran Fellowship in Moral Theology at St. Joseph Seminary in the Archdiocese of New York. Previously, he spent 14 years in Fordham University's theology department. He is the author of 8 books and has written about a host of contemporary moral problems, including abortion and healthcare ethics, for both academic publications and major national media outlets. Dr. Camosy also advises the Pro-Life Commission for the Archdiocese of New York. Dr. Camosy is a proud knight of the St. Peter Claver Society. He and his wife have 4 children, 3 of whom they adopted from a Filipino orphanage in June of 2016. Well, Dr. Camosy, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. Some of us that have been involved in the pro-life movement in a variety of ways over the years. I've been a priest 49 years and a bishop almost 25, so I had an opportunity to think and pray and speak about pro-life matters over the years. And I would say I find in myself and maybe in some of the people around me a little bit of bewilderment, trying to figure out sort of where are we on this journey as we try to share the light of the gospel and offer the teaching of the church, also the compassion of the church in a variety of ways. So I'm hoping that for me and those who might be able to view the podcast, you might be able to shed some light on this for us from your own experience and dedication and from your research and study. So maybe you could, if you would, just describe how you see the state of the pro-life movement in the country these days, particularly since the overturning of Roe versus Wade in 2022. So where are we and how did we get here?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this question. It's my life's passion. My first job ever was as real job. I was a dishwasher before that, I guess. My first real job was as a communications director for Pro-Life Wisconsin, where I grew up. And that was in between my master's and Ph.D. And that was in 1999. So I've been in the pro-life movement in various ways for about 25 years. And my opinion is just one person's opinion, but I think demoralized is maybe a good way to describe it. The massive losses, or as the kids would say, L's we've been taking since Dobbs have been really demoralizing. And I think by extension confusing because, frankly, I think many of us, including myself, thought that that public opinion was such that some of these ballot measures we've lost, we would have won, especially in states like Ohio and Kansas. And there's obviously one coming up in Nebraska we can talk about. But I'd also describe this as in transition, a kind of sense that, as important as it was to do what we've done the last 25 years or so, and longer perhaps, there's a need for a new kind of energy, a new kind of idea, a new kind of approach, in part because what we've been doing thus far has not really been working very well. And our opponents are effective, they're well-funded, more organized, better prepared. And so I think, I guess I'd finish by saying that we're kind of in transition, trying to address the demoralization and confusion.
Yeah, I think we had all hoped that if Roe were overturned and these issues were brought back to the states, that we would have more of an effect, more success, if you want to put it that way, in protecting innocent human life and really moving forward a culture of life in our country. But so my hope is that some of our good pro-life Catholics and others might listen in here, and what's the kind of encouragement we can offer? So you say we're in transition. I think that's well put. But transition to what? And then maybe how can we help shape the transition individually and corporately? Maybe where do you think it's possible to go from here?
Well, again, I'm one person on this question.
Yeah,
There are in fact different positions on this, as you and I know quite well. One of
sure.
the great gifts of the pro-life movement is its diversity. It's also a challenge sometimes because people have very different opinions about these things. So not everyone will share my opinion about this, but I guess it's this, that the fight for equal protection of the law, what I like to call prenatal justice for every prenatal human being, every prenatal baby, every prenatal child is essential. And that's where we have to end up if we care about justice, just as we've cared about that for women, for racial minorities. We need a similar kind of justice-centered civil rights movements for prenatal human beings. But again, this is one person's opinion. What I think the last few months or year or so has revealed is that our culture really isn't ready for this right now. It can't really hear it the way we'd like to have it be heard right now. And so we have to do a lot of the cultivation. There's all these metaphors in the gospel about farming, right? And as a Midwest boy, I loved all those. In order to really let the true fruit that we want to come from our work come into existence, we have to cultivate the ground a little bit, I think. And one important way to do this, and this is something you and I have discussed, I think, is to show that abortion is not, in fact, a good thing for women, much less a necessary thing for women. I think if we can show that, we create the conceptual space for our culture to understand why it's so important to push for prenatal justice. Because right now, I think the culture is kind of captured by a media, by an academy, by other powerful institutions, which focus only on the mother to the exclusion of the baby. And there's lots of ways to do this. And pro-lifers have been doing this for a very long time, but I think we need a really concerted effort, in particular, to focus on the fact that abortion is not good for women in a very particular way, because it's forced on women who don't want abortions. So unwanted and coerced abortions are a very, very high percentage. In fact, there's some data to show that about 7 in 10 abortions are either unwanted, coerced, or otherwise at odds with the mother's values. This also happens to be profound common ground in the culture. So again, if we want to cultivate the ground, we need the common ground. We need to be able to build from common areas where we agree. And I think this is I know, in fact, this is a big one. It's a place where people who identify as pro-choice, genuinely pro-choice, not pro-abortion, but genuinely pro-choice, agree with us and say, well, if these abortions are coerced, if they're not what a woman wants, then as a pro-choice person, they would say, I don't want that either. I want the woman to be able to make a choice. And we as pro-lifers have slightly different reasons for wanting the same thing. So we can work together, for instance, on the fact that intimate partner violence and abortion are highly correlated. Like it looks like for all the world, and we need a little bit more study on this. Maybe that's another thing we could cooperate on. But it looks like intimate partner violence and abortion are correlated because intimate partner violence is used to coerce abortions that women don't want to have. In fact, to throw more evidence into the mix here, homicide is a far more significant marker for how pregnant women die than preeclampsia or frankly, any other medical condition. I'll just say that again so that it hits home. Homicide, killing, right? Murder is a more prevalent way that pregnant women die than all the other any other medical procedure. So can't we work together on this at least? Can't we work on making sure that women are not being coerced or otherwise pushed into unwanted abortions that are at odds with their values?
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it, by the sort of modern way of looking and talking about healthcare that includes a range of procedures and services that up until recently we would think are just the opposite of care, but abortion as one tool, you might say, on the spectrum of women's health. So it's
Absolutely.
yeah, it seems a twisted concept to me, but a lot of people have bought it. And I've had some conversations recently with Catholic women who I know who are very concerned about the need for women to have more say about their health care, more feel more like they're heard, as they seek legitimate health care around pregnancy or other things, and they see that the push to restrict abortion is somehow impinging on their, on that right, or that desire to have a little more autonomy in those matters.
And it's understandable, especially given the history of women not being able to have autonomy over their bodies, not being able to make choices that reflect the fullness of their health. And so it's an understandable impulse. We should honor that impulse. It should be something that we address in all sorts of cases, including massive disparities when it comes to race and economic vulnerability, when it comes to people who are women that do in fact die of preeclampsia or high blood pressure or any of these other maladies that sometimes affect pregnant women. And so that kind of prenatal care needs to be far more available, of a sufficient quality to help, and especially for vulnerable populations, needs to be available and more widely available. That said, it's just a lie to say that the intentional killing of a baby has anything to do with healthcare. And that's why the church makes such a strong distinction between what would be called a direct abortion, which, to use a fancy moral theological term, the object of the act is the death of the baby, right? As opposed to other kinds of genuinely medical acts where the death of the baby is not the object of the act, where the death of the baby is a unintended, if foreseen, consequence. So if, for instance, a woman has cancer of the uterus, a pregnant woman has cancer of the uterus, the Catholic Church is perfectly fine with there being a prudential judgment on the behalf of the mother to say, well, I'm going to have a hysterectomy and remove the cancerous uterus, foreseeing but not intending the baby is likely to die. But in fact, if the baby lived miraculously, or perhaps there was a mistake made about the gestational age, the woman and everyone would be overjoyed, because the point was to remove the cancerous uterus, not to end up with a dead baby. But the lies that are told, frankly, about procedures that are really aiming at making a baby dead, that's saying that that's healthcare, that no coherent concept of healthcare that I know of could ever describe that as healthcare. And by the way, I just came 2 weeks ago from Dallas, the annual meeting of APLOG, the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. There are so many pro-life healthcare providers who are so interested in caring for women and their babies, caring for both patients in ways that don't aim at the death of the child. And we can do it. I mean, there's so much evidence to show, actually, that one does not need broad access to legal baby killing via abortion to have good health outcomes for women. In fact, Poland is a great example. Poland has some of the most severe, if you will, one might say instead justice-centered restrictions on abortion in all of the EU. But guess which country has the best health outcomes for women in the EU? Poland does. So Poland, and Chile is another example. Chile, a few years ago, had some dramatic restrictions on abortion come into place, and they actually had health outcomes improve for women, pregnant women and mothers. So if we put our focus where it should be, which is on genuine health care for vulnerable populations, vulnerable women and their children, we have very good outcomes. And there's absolutely no need to confuse that with procedures which aim at the death of children.
Yeah, so thanks for those reflections, on the sort of the twisted understanding that has been promoted about healthcare. You mentioned earlier, that there's a fair amount of common ground in terms of desiring really good outcomes for women, protecting women from harm and from violence. Do you see any places where there are conversations going on now between people who seem to be on opposite sides of this issue, but maybe have a chance to come together, or could you think of places where we might initiate conversations like that?
Yeah, I'm actually living one right now. There is a sociology professor at a secular university in New York. I don't want to out her too directly, but who reached out to me and said, I'm pro-choice. I don't share your views on abortion law, but I hate the idea of coerced abortions. I think they're awful. And I work in certain areas where we study various kind of interventions for especially vulnerable women, poor women, and how they affect outcomes if you do X and measure the outcome. And I would like to do that, she said, and work with you and your colleagues, pro-life colleagues, in doing that when it comes to unwanted and coerced abortion. And if this is one random person just sort of emailing me out of the blue, if we were systematic about it, I guarantee we would find lots and lots of, again, not pro-abortion people, which do exist, but genuinely pro-choice people who kind of live in maybe a more complicated reality than maybe we see on social media or cable news or this administration, let's be honest. And engaging those folks I found to be very fruitful over the years, in part because it really, even the engagement itself, the Holy Father has been really insistent on our accompanying other people, encountering other people. And this is a really important way for us to work, not only to produce good outcomes, which are important, but also to just have those relationships, form relationships so we don't live in this kind of space of lobbying things at each other all the time. I guess another area that I would point to would be the massive, at least in the corners I've seen, massive attempts to retool our social structures to be more friendly to pregnant women and mothers more generally, and for families, like paid family leave, for instance. This most recent bill, federal omnibus bill in the House, contained a lot of money for child tax credits. It's a very important area of common ground, it seems to me. Workers' protections based on family status. That already exist, but those can always be strengthened. And then the massive, massive cost of childcare, which is something that I'm dealing with my own family, as my wife and I have jobs which take us away from our children at the same time very often. Sometimes the government program is not the answer, but sometimes just having a little extra help to do those things could really provide the difference between choosing to have more children or choosing to have fewer children, which comes from contraception or abortion.
Yeah, it strikes me through our state Catholic conferences, we can maybe initiate some of those conversations, about legislation locally, and maybe reach across some of these what seem to be chasms to invite others to be part of that conversation and to support some of these things. I know we've had some success with this here in Nebraska. But as you talk about encounter with others and accompaniment, one of the groups that particularly concerns me as a pastor would be young adults in our church. On the day that the Dobbs decision was announced a couple of years ago, there was a big demonstration protesting that decision, a big demonstration in a park just a couple blocks from my house. And I watched as these several hundred, more than several hundred, 700 or 800 people were leaving, kind of streaming up the sidewalk from the park. And what struck me right away was it was mostly a younger group, not only young. But what struck me is that just the realization that I have very little contact with any of those folks, and not likely to have any, and not just me, but really any of our pastors, any of our parish structures. We know just statistically, most folks that age are not affiliating with our church or probably with any other one. And so, and then, reading some of the analysis of these elections in Ohio, other states, you just see that voters in that age group went overwhelmingly what we would call pro-choice, I guess, in favor of more liberal abortion. So maybe you can just comment a little on that, if I'm right about that group for one thing, and then maybe where we might initiate an encounter or where you might see it happening already.
Yeah. Well, that's a very wise insight. And in trying to answer it or say more about it, I think it gets complicated because I think there are multiple reasons for it. Maybe a foundational reason, from my perspective anyway, again, this is one person's perspective, is young people are really hurting right now, more generally. Maybe it has something to do with abortion, maybe not, but that's maybe a place to just start. If you come across an animal or a pet who is very aggressive towards you, one of the first things you think about, maybe they're injured in a way, right? They're hurt. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show that's what's happening with young people. The rates of anxiety and depression are off the charts. And the amount of pressure, especially we're putting on young people to completely come up with their own self-identity, right? To invent their identity whole cloth, right? And to project it on social media is a burden I wouldn't wish on anyone. And that, of course, must have some impact when it comes to the huge rates of anxiety and depression. There's also a really strong pushback against all institutions, not just the Catholic Church. Big institutions have failed them at every stage. And just to call out something that I don't know if your audience will agree with or not, but I'll just say it because I think it's true. Most young people do not support Donald Trump or his administration. And to the extent that the Dobbs decision came from their perspective, the Trump administration, his appointment of judges, they identify instead of the kind of pro-woman analysis and lens we've been looking at for all of this conversation thus far, they associate it with a person in an administration they really can't stand. So it gets to the level of hate and anger too. I'd also note that social media spaces and also college and academic spaces are totally in the tank for abortion. There are some small forces of resistance, but in the main, these are places that are abortion affirming. And of course, with the algorithm wants to reinforce that with young people, so they constantly get fed pro-choice or pro-abortion news stories, commentary, TikToks, and so it's just a constant stream there. And then I hope this isn't talking down too much. I'm a professor. I've taught young people for a long time now. I currently teach seminarians and medical students. So I'm teaching a slightly older crowd, but taught for 15 years at Fordham University and taught a lot of undergraduates and give talks at universities regularly. The facts of abortion just aren't widely known among young people, right? The facts of prenatal biology are not known. The actual ways in which abortions kill babies is not known. In fact, the idea that abortion actually kills a baby is news to people, right? And you have to go into those really difficult details to show that it is, because our culture, again, is geared towards hiding those things and pushing the pro-abortion or pro-choice or pro-choice approach. And so you combine all these things together, plus the idea that our culture says, especially to young women, hey, you need abortion and contraception to just participate in the life of the nation. That was actually in the 1992 Planned Parenthood versus Casey Supreme Court decision. And that has really filtered into our culture in a significant way. It was interesting to hear a lot of men talk about the post-Dobbs context, in which case they were like, What are we going to do to participate in, they didn't quite say it like this, but what are we going to do to participate in hookup culture now? Our fail safe might be going away. Women would even say, I'm not going to participate in hookup culture now without the fail safe of abortion. So again, you put all these things together, it's multifaceted. And I think that's what gets you an 800 person protest that's full of anger, full of hurt, full of misunderstanding, frankly. And our response to that has to be one of compassion, right? It has to be the field hospital. It has to be the accompanier, right? The individual says, I understand why you're hurting. I care about the fact you're hurting. I love you. But per Pope Benedict and our current Holy Father, having the courage to speak the truth in love, right? In ways that can be heard in a winsome way, in a careful way, in a way that focuses on the yes that the church stands for and not so much just on the no. And we've been talking a lot about the yes during this podcast, right? There's a big yes here to women, not just a no. And but that takes relationship building. That takes a sense of a real sense that we're a field hospital for a lot of hurting people.
Part of the purpose of our podcasts are to encourage those who view it to remember that Jesus has commissioned all of us to go out to witness the gospel in our own way. So in a minute, we'll get to maybe some encouragement for those who are watching, but would you be generous enough to share just a little bit about your own desire to share the faith? You have the professional competence to do it, but I sense a prayerful and a passionate person there who really in some ways delights in sharing the good news with others and having an influence as you do it. So can you talk a little bit about the story of your own faith and witness, and then maybe we can offer some encouragement to those who are watching.
Yeah, I guess there was never a time. I mean, I was a philosophy major, and I guess at one time I thought you could just make arguments about these things and just bring the arguments and evidence, and then fully rational people would just come to the right conclusion. And I still think there is a place for arguments, but what I've discovered, especially as a theologian and a person of faith, a son of the church, is that, I go back to Christ himself, right? The word was made flesh and dwelt among us. The word is proclaimed through a book, right? Sacred scripture. But Christians and Catholics have the word made flesh, both in the historical fact that the word was made flesh, and in continuing through the Eucharist today. We have access to the body and blood of Christ, more often the body these days. I can't get the blood very much these days. I don't know what we can do about that, but I think that's what we really need to understand. It builds off the point I was making in response to your earlier question, that sort of these embodied interactions with people are just as important, if not more important, than getting the facts right and marshaling the correct evidence and showing how the arguments work. These relationships, these field hospitals, these relationships of accompaniment extended over time. This is something I talk about with my seminarians a lot. This is very rarely a one and done type thing. It's a commitment to a particular person or persons over time. And that comes out of my faith. That comes out of my attempt, anyway, not always successful, to live out the Great Commission, right? What was Christ's Great Commission? It was to go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. And this is an essential part of what it is. And I think, actually, when the backlash forms against the kind of violence, the kind of false vision of the person, false understanding of women and what women women want and what makes women flourish. When the backlash comes, I think the church is going to be actually in a pretty good position to say, here are some of the mistakes we've made as a culture, and we have some answers for you. Does this seem wrong to you? Does it seem wrong that the abortion rate is, in the Bronx where I used to teach, 45%, 45 out of every 100, pregnancies ending in abortion. Does that seem like it's a mistake? Does it seem like a mistake that the most vulnerable, the poorest of the poor, the racial minorities are forced into abortions they don't want? Does that seem wrong to you? Does that seem like something's amiss? Well, we have some answers to explain what's going on there. And it's a dynamite opportunity for evangelization, and from my perspective. And one of the key themes I've been harping on over the last 5 to 6 years, I would say, is that really and talk about common ground, this concept of fundamental human equality that young people especially really want to hold on to, doesn't really exist given the secular alternatives. The foundation of fundamental human equality is, of course, all human beings being made in the image and likeness of God, the Imago Dei. That's what makes us all equal. That's what gives us the same kind of moral value. The kind of alternatives that are presented, autonomy, self-awareness, rationality, capacity for creating one's own identity. I mean, these are things human beings clearly do not have in equal measure. But one thing we do have in equal measure is, of course, the fact that our human nature, it reflects the image and likeness of God in precisely the same way. No matter how big, no matter how small, no matter how young, old, dependent, able-bodied, not able-bodied, we're all the same. And I've also found that to be a deeply attractive and important theological tool, a tool of evangelization, a way into these conversations. And I'm happy to do it as a theologian. I'll finish this overly long answer by saying this. I've been asked before when speaking in a secular context, are you sure you want to be introduced as a theologian? Wouldn't you feel better being introduced as a philosopher? And I said, no, thank you. I'll be introduced as a theologian, in part for the reasons I just said, right? These are ideas and approaches that I think are going to be most welcome. They're not welcome now, but they will be most welcome as the culture turns on the bankruptcy and hurt and violence, and like I said, anxiety and depression that is currently being produced.
It's a beautiful answer. Thanks for your witness and for your work. And you ended really on what I would consider a note of hope, which maybe we can extend to our viewers, because it's not something that will be fixed immediately, but we can begin something, and or be open to the day, which may be coming soon, when there is this cry, you might say, from the culture about the brokenness that is being felt and experienced, and we corporately but individually have something to offer. Thanks too for just stressing the centrality of the encountering the person of Jesus, which we do in the sacraments, in other ways in the church too, but most especially in the Eucharist. It's something we're really encouraging in our pastoral vision for our archdiocese, but it's right in line with what the Pope is encouraging for all of us too, is that the personal encounter with the Lord changes everything for us if we are with Him, invite Him to be with us, if we're listening to Him in prayer and desire to bring Him to others. So maybe we could end the conversation just with some practical encouragement for those who might be listening to us, watching the podcast, because I think we're facing a ballot initiative in the state of Nebraska later this year, that runs the risk for us of just opening wide the possibility for abortion without much restriction. And in the future, we'd like to stop that. We'd like to fix what's leading to that. So I think that all of us want to just kind of do something, fix something. But maybe, based on what you were just saying about your own experience, what opportunities beyond that might we anticipate, or what might be an opportunity in a family or in a neighborhood or among the people with whom we work to maybe shine the light of the gospel in this area in a way that not only is hopeful for the one that's offering it, but also maybe for a relationship that might be formed.
Yeah, I'll just say some things about the sort of broad way of approaching that, and then maybe some specific ideas. The first thing I'd say is let's not lose our sense of boldness and creativity in thinking about how to answer that important question you just asked. Paul, writing to Timothy says, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. And there's a lot of opportunities for fear here, right? A lot of opportunities to sort of cower away from this, but that's not the spirit that God has given us through our baptism. That's not how we as temples of the Holy Spirit reflect the Spirit of God. We have spirits of power and of love and of sound mind. And I think being bold is an essential part of that. Being creative is an essential part of that. Reading the signs of the times and responding to the specific signs of the times is an important part of that. And as far as specifics go, we've already suggested some of them, but beyond working for specific legislation, as your suggestive comments intimate, I mean, there's all sorts of things we can do at the level of intermediate institutions in our families. One of the key questions, I think, about this is, are we going to give women who are in desperate situations an alternative place to live? This may sound dramatic, and I know the lawyers always get on us for like how much these things cost and liability insurance and all the rest, but we have to find a way to get vulnerable women out of the kind of toxic situations they find themselves in, which cause them forced to kill their own children. There was a pro-life feminist named, I think her name was Frederica Matthews Green, who analogized abortion to an animal whose leg was caught into a trap, who gnaws their own leg off, right? It's just like this utter desperation. But if one is, as I suggested towards the beginning of these remarks, caught in this desperate situation where one maybe relies for housing, food, resources, care for other children. Most women that have abortions already have children, and they have nowhere else to go. This is one of the beauties of the Sisters of Life and their work with women in New York. They actually give them a space to go to get out of there. But for all the good things that pro-life pregnancy centers do, and all the good things that so many who witness to the needs of women in the pro-life movement do, it's expensive, it's difficult, but I really think we need a new focus on saying, listen, we know intimate partner violence is a huge part of this issue. We know that even homicide rears its ugly head. We need to give women a place to get out of there. And maybe we have, I don't know if this is a naive sort of ivory tower idea, but in many places in the church in the United States, we have all these empty buildings, empty schools, empty rectories, empty convents. They're being leased out or maybe even stayed empty. I wonder if they could be repurposed to give people who need a place to live other than where they are a new place.
We have a couple of instances of that here in the city of Omaha. Former convents being used just for this purpose. It's a beautiful thing to see, and a great possibility, which it could be duplicated and multiplied. It takes the dedicated people to do it and the resources, but anyway, we already see the fruit of it, but more needs to be done.
And that's just one example. I mean, there are plenty of creative, bold people filled with a spirit of power, love, and sound mind rather than fear. But maybe that's the thing I would leave you with and your audience with, is just try to be quiet and pray before the Blessed Sacrament. And I need help at putting this thing away, right? So I don't constantly have that disturbing my relationship with my Creator and hearing God's voice in the quiet. God will speak to us on these things, and will give us a plan to execute, whether it's the kind of thing I was just talking about or something else. I firmly believe that that will be provided the answers we need, and then we need the boldness to overcome the fear to actually get it done.
Well, thanks very much. I think maybe we'll leave it at that. That's a great note on which to end. I especially appreciated your own witness, rooted in your prayer and your encounter with Jesus in the Scripture and in the sacraments. I think that's an encouragement to all of us who are involved in this important pro-life work. Thanks too for expressing the importance of the encounter that Jesus desires us to have with one another, and especially with those who may be hurting or who may be looking for the truth but may not have found it, or may have some misconceptions about what is really true and good. In our own prayer, we ask the Lord to help us see the person who might be close to us in our own family, maybe in our neighborhood, maybe among the people with whom we work or go to school, somebody who we might come close to, offer friendship and encouragement just in the place where they find themselves now, and then maybe be open to a further conversation about the beauty and the dignity of their own life, and then of the lives of those who in our society are so vulnerable.
Thanks, Archbishop.
So thanks to everybody for listening. We have challenges ahead of us in living and preaching the gospel of life, but we've just received a lot of encouragement. The Lord is with us. We have the gifts of the Holy Spirit. It certainly is a time of transition in the pro-life movement. We can't exactly see where we're going from here in all the particulars, but we know that the Lord has a place for us in sharing the light of the gospel now and in the days to come. So let's pray for one another, especially here in Nebraska, as we face some important challenges, and we'll count on the light and the wisdom, the prudence of the Holy Spirit. God bless you.